The following video contains spoilers. It's been many years since the techniques of classic cinema have been shelved, but the Technicolor thriller The Love Witch, made in 2016, directed, produced and written by Anna Biller, resurrects classic Hollywood lighting to, in her own words, cast spells over the audience. The film touches on feminism and the female gaze, as claimed or alluded to by Anna herself in multiple interviews. Unlike Belladonna, Anna sets out her intent rather clearly, so there's little room for interpretation in that regard. She said in a Rolling Stone interview, "Straight men are the ones who usually see this as a homage to exploitation film. It's not wrong," she continues, "to look at it as a sexy movie, but that's not how I made it. I did this for the young women seeing it. This doesn't mean you can't enjoy the film or even the analysis if you don't view things from this perspective, but if you're uncomfortable with the touching on of these themes represented in the film, feel free to skip this video or exit out. Secondly, when I talk in absolutes, it doesn't mean you can't interpret things in other ways. This is simply the offering of an interpretation or several. You are entitled to your own, and you do not have to agree with any perspective proposed in this video." I feel the need to say this because I always get that one annoying comment every few videos talking about my pushing of a specific ideology, namely cherry picking things to say I was saying Belladonna was feminist. First, I gave 3 positions on Belladonna: a feminist interpretation, one of exploitation, and neither. I also didn't realise people would be so pedantic for me to explicitly state that even if I only give 1 or 3 interpretations, it still doesn't mean you have to agree with any. That's why I said the freedom of interpretation is what makes art art. Finally, just because we touch on something from a specific lens, specifically a feminist lens and the female gaze in this video, because Anna Biller herself draws upon this in interviews, this is not necessarily a reflection of my own views or ideology. It should be taken more in the vein of, if this is read from a feminist perspective, it could mean, or if we read this from a feminine experience because Anna Biller intended it to be, but I digress. The film is set in an ambiguous time period. There are only some allusions of it not taking place in the 1960s, like the modern cars or contemporary buildings. Elaine, a beautiful young witch, is driving to Arcana, California, a town which tolerates witchcraft. At the heart of the Wiccan practice is witchcraft, whose indoctrination Elaine has succumbed to. Love magic is the main interest and speciality of our protagonist, hence the title, The Love Witch. Love is not just what Elaine desires most, but also the entire basis of her identity. Anna explains she chose a witch protagonist as the witch is a very loaded female image, as she stands for both female power and the male fear of female sexuality. Barbara Creed adds that Elaine is represented within patriarchal discourses as an implacable enemy of the symbolic order. The witch is, as per Heather Green, located in terms of wild femininity, a characteristic of women that are situated outside of accepted norms and at odds with true womanhood, which is exemplified by domesticity, religiosity, sexual purity, and subordination to the male. She reaches for a cigarette from her red cigarette case matching her outfit, and immediately we see tarot cards. The Love Witch uses a lot of tarot imagery. The tarot deck featured is the Rider-Waite tarot deck. The tarot card visible on top is the 3 of Swords, which pops up multiple times. It's representative of heartbreak and pain. Elaine is moving after the death of her husband, Jerry. It is heavily implied she was involved in his demise and was abused. She is then flagged down by a police car for a broken taillight and is visibly nervous. The officer is Griff, the guy she later thinks is the one. She then drives to rent an apartment in a Victorian home which is owned by Elaine's mentor Barbara, a fellow witch. It is kept up by its interior decorator Trish Manning. We see Elaine exit her red car completely red shoes, red suitcases and a red dress. Anna Biller was also the production designer and costumer, hand sewing most of the clothes, which took about a year and a half. Whilst witches in media are most associated with the colour black, the Love Witch breaks these tropes. Red continuously appears on screen and is representative of passion, anger, love, danger and excitement. Red is Elaine. The monochromatic opulence in the film could be read as yonic imagery, which put simply is just symbolic imagery meant to evoke female genitalia. In this scene, red engulfs Elaine as if she's the embodiment of a wound that has come to life. This message of Elaine as a wound bleeds into most scenes and characters in the film. She wreaks havoc and brings misfortune to just about everyone in her life. Elaine is a woman that will love you to death. Trish, wearing peach, introduces herself to Elaine. In the background, the purple Victorian mansion looms amongst the pastel pinks and blues of the town. The Gothic beauty stands out distinctly from the rest of the neighbourhood, just like Elaine. The house aptly sports a witch's hat turret. Elaine and Trish then enter the apartment together. Something remarkable about this film is its unity. Most of the film locations appear as if tarot cards have come to life, and there's arcana imagery present throughout the film. This is thanks to Anna's involvement in the smallest details of the film. Many tarot-like paintings are painted by Anna herself, the rest of which were commissioned specifically for the film. This attentiveness lends a certain psychological intimacy to the production design. Not only does Elaine's apartment match her character, but so does everything Elaine continues to do, her paintings, filling her space with her work. The signature colours red, blue and yellow of the Toff Tarot deck are featured prominently in Elaine's apartment, which she declares to be exactly her taste. Trish makes specific mentions to the apartment being decorated like a tarot deck with occult paintings. To elaborate, the apartment is decorated with stained glass lampshades, floral curtains, figurines, and so on. What's important to note here is that we can see two rooms simultaneously. The back room is furnished with cooler colours like blue, whilst the panel in the front room with the door is accented with warm colours like yellow, orange and brown. The rooms are split into sun and moon imagery inspired by tarot cards. The contrast is a visual representation of the discordance of Elaine's desires. On one hand, she's desperate for love, and on the other, she's hungry for power. In the comfort of her own space, these two elements can coexist with each other, but outside her apartment, the world judges and questions these contrasting desires. So I think it's a good time to mention her makeup since it's such a defining feature of this film. It serves as one of the most striking features of Elaine's appearance and therefore one of the first things you notice. The makeup may take inspiration from the aesthetics of mid-century Hollywood Technicolor and Alfred Hitchcock's 1950s color films. Although, despite coloured eyeshadows, particularly blue and green, becoming fashionable in the 1930s, a close examination of some of Hitchcock's 50s colour films reveals neutral coloured eyeshadows, with red lipstick being the only vibrant colour. Therefore, whilst Elaine's makeup reflects some of the 1950s makeup trends, namely the arched brows and bold lips, her makeup can be best described as unspecifically vintage, taking inspirations from other decades like the bright eyeshadows of the 60s and 70s. Elaine's glamour mask undoubtedly stands out against the other women in her small Californian town, where she has moved to. Makeup in The Love Witch could represent wickedness or an ability to transform. Makeup has the ability to transform, accentuating features which could associate it with theatricality or sexualized femininity. Makeup can therefore be marked as an agent of deception, positioning it as a dangerous and corrupting medium. Throughout certain points of history, wearing visible makeup has been deemed socially unacceptable because of its perceived links to secrecy, feminine wiles, magic, and witchcraft. For example, Puritan Thomas Tuke wrote in 1616, "A painted face is a false face." The link between the painting of a face and feminine trickery gave rise to fear of any bewitching face, whether natural or artificially enhanced. The idea appears in the film, where Elaine's heavily painted face is used as a tool to lure men. Anna calls Elaine a totally constructed woman, with layers of makeup, lashes, lingerie, a wig, and Victorian costumes, all of which she hides behind and uses as a weapon. The subversion is that Elaine, as Trish tells her, is brainwashed by the patriarchy to equate intercourse with love, but simultaneously disgusted by the sentimentality and neediness of her love interests. In Anna's words, whilst Elaine is a woman seeking love, she is never really loved for who she is and is therefore driven mad by only being loved for the male fantasies she has been brainwashed to fulfill. Despite the normalization and general acceptance of makeup, excessive makeup was still a faux pas. Early cinema categorized this overpainted woman as the other, sometimes fixing her labels like the vamp. The Love Witch depicts Elaine satirically, masquerading as the perfect woman of men's fantasies whilst housing sociopathic tendencies in reality. Unlike vamps with their smoky eyes and dark lips, the Love Witch offers its own edition of overdone makeup. It's particularly distinct with its overt use of colour, which Anna has said she uses colour and lighting techniques to deliberately create a type of hypnosis or trance over the audience, just like Elaine does as a witch with her magic. Shortly after Elaine arrives in town, she optimistically visits an overtly feminine pink tea room with Trish, where an angelic woman sings and plays the harp. Elaine is wearing a romantic peach vintage gun-sax dress, perhaps in an attempt to fit in, whilst Trish's businesslike pantsuit differentiates her. Anna designed the tea room as an entirely feminine space, completely pink, important to note as the colours change in a later scene. The imagery of Elaine as a wound appears again, but this time in the form of the tea room. The setting acts as a uterine homage, like the inside of a womb. Additionally, the colours of the tea room are both reflected and opposed by Elaine's makeup. To elaborate, whilst her bright pink blush integrates itself with the colour scheme, her turquoise eyeshadow, whilst bright, upbeat and signalling her optimism, both complements yet contrast the pink decor and costumes of the other tea room guests. It marks her as different and the other. Elaine's eyeshadow colour is particularly interesting. If you watched my video on Belladonna where I interpreted Jan's changing hair colour as a representation of her different moods. In this case, I believe it's Elaine's shifting eyeshadow colour that is a particularly visible indicator of a shift in emotional state. Her eyeshadow morphs from a bright, upbeat turquoise in the tea room to more of a practical one with nature, peaceful green when she's creating potions and painting in her apartment. When her romances go wrong, she's seen wearing deep purple. Contrasting against when she believes she's found the one, her eyeshadow turns to a soft lilac. Billa stated that when she watches a beautiful woman in film, she is inspired by her hair and her makeup. I want to look like her. Maybe I have a fantasy of being that beautiful. Anna's suggesting that Elaine springs from the notion of a female gaze. She says, the same gaze that exists in the beauty and fashion industry. Women look at other women in fashion magazines and they're wearing a ton of makeup and they look beautiful. As such, the film manages to both celebrate and critique women that harness male desire to accomplish their goals. Elaine's arsenal of magical tools doesn't just consist of her spells and potions, but also her hairpieces, wardrobe, and makeup, equipped like armor. Whilst Elaine's aesthetic, her magical glamour, allows her to be consumed by the female gaze, it's set against Elaine's less empowering motive, to be the male fantasy figure for her quest to secure true love. Although we may be more sympathetic to her plight when we understand Elaine has been wounded by her failed marriage, emerging as psychologically damaged. In this scene, Elaine and Trish run into a slight disagreement about male attention over tea and cake, which neither consumes. Elaine explains that women should give men what they want. Trish responds by telling her she's been brainwashed by the patriarchy, and asks, "What do men want?" Elaine replies to give them total freedom in whatever they want to do or be. You're probably wondering how this film is feminist, aside from the purported use of the witch figure and femme fatale as a metaphor for the embodiment of men's fears of women and women's innate powers. So far, it just sounds like Elaine is a practitioner of the dark arts that's not fond of feminism. And as some film critics have, viewing this film under the lens of the male gaze makes the final product, disregarding its intent, seem very anti-feminist. First, I want to address an article I found referencing a post that Annabella made on her blog titled "Let's Stop Calling Movies Feminist," and that she rejects the interpretation of her films as either exploitation or feminist. The article references the line in which she writes, To be feminist, a movie has to have the express purpose of educating its audience about social inequality between men and women. This would appear somewhat contradictory to a few interviews, such as for the AV Club, in which she states, "This is what men demand of women." It's kind of a social irony. They want this woman who's beautiful, she's perfect, she looks gorgeous all the time, she's subservient, she doesn't talk too much, she cooks for them, she's loving. The comedy comes from the literal interpretation of what is demanded of her, which comes across like deliberate express intent. The article concludes that whether her own film is feminist is not really up to her, it is up to you. So I went to read the blog post, and it may very well be that Anna is trying to eschew labels of feminism, but I couldn't find any direct mentions of her not wanting the Love Witch to be labelled as feminist. Reading this post, it sounds like she's talking more in the context of retroactively inserting feminism into the exploitation films of the 60s and 70s. She continues, "By using the word feminism so often, we are erasing feminist discourse. The overuse of the word feminism has rendered it entirely meaningless as a serious political topic, making it easier for everyone to think of it as just a trendy subject or buzzword rather than the very fabric of women's lives." Regardless, Anna at the very least does appear to have intended a female-orientated view. If we switch to this perspective, whilst Elaine presents herself as trying hard to maintain a sexualized demeanor, depicting herself as generally submissive and coy to her male love interests, dressing in a hyper-feminine way, wearing bright makeup, hair extensions, and speaking in a soft feminine way, she ultimately ends up dominating these men. Elaine's struggle for love and power play out with Elaine loving these men, but to their death. Hence the film arguably plays on the male gaze, but only to subvert and, quote, smash the distinctions that structure contemporary debates about feminism and women, from objectification and empowerment to victimhood and vengeance. I don't want to linger here too long, so I'll touch on this with more specific examples as they come up. There is perhaps some feminist messaging that could be read here. It's just the subject is perhaps more subversive and dealt with unexpectedly. If we read it from Anna's view, the film uses self-aware humor and complicated emotion to celebrate stereotypes while simultaneously bashing them. It purposefully embodies gendered cliches like becoming a man's fantasy to provide a critique of what it means to be socially recognized as a woman or feminine. Just because a character isn't feminist doesn't immediately make the film exploitative. Elaine could be read as symbolic of the absurdities of expectations placed on women, which is what Anna said in her AV Club interview. When Trish's husband Richard joins, Elaine seemingly retaliates by enchanting him with her gaze. I want to circle back to Elaine's internal-external discord. As Anna mentions, she was trying to flip back and forth between those positions throughout the film. For instance, when Elaine has voiceovers in her head having flashbacks or being in love, the audience is feeling her internal experience. Anna continues, when she's being a total B to Trish in the tea room, stealing her man and being an otherwise total sociopath, you're looking at her from the outside, judging her. I wanted to put the audience in the role of judging women and at other times just look at her. An opaque, beautiful woman. I wanted the point of view to keep flipping. In her element, Elaine paints, makes potions and performs a ritual where she pleads for a new love. After visiting a magical apothecary, Elaine visits a nearby park and immediately seduces Wayne, a literature professor at a local college. I want to bring back focus to her paintings and mention the motif of eyes. The motif appears in Elaine's paintings, which allows her gaze to follow and objectify these men without their awareness, bringing back this idea of feminine power and Elaine's domination over these men. They travel to Wayne's cabin where she gets him to drink a concoction containing hallucinogenic herbs. Before they sleep together, there's rainbows or lens flare, and Elaine removes her coat, revealing a rainbow panel on the inside. The rainbow may represent what Elaine is willing to give away, her body and sexual gratification. As they are in bed, there's another close-up shot of Elaine's eyes, bringing us back to this motif, which has been present since the start. An interpretation of the repeating imagery of Elaine's vibrant eyes could be that we are supposed to be constantly reminded that Elaine is the focus. This feminine gaze literally takes control, situating us, the spectators, and Elaine's male victims to subconscious submission, elevating her position. And when the men show emotion, which Elaine brings out of them through intercourse, a close-up of her eyes appear with an iridescent flash. The colourful imagery is in stark contrast to the image of the men's own eyes as they begin dying or are no longer alive. It's as if she's taken away their life force and therefore power. It can also be viewed as a play on how toxic masculinity, particularly the inability to feel or confront emotions, is quite literally a killer of men. Wayne and later Richard, whilst feeling emotion and turning into emotional wrecks, both crying out to Elaine for comfort, don't seem to comprehend these newfound feelings of love and desire, so it ultimately kills them. It could also be seen as Billa's attempt to remind us that men can be even more emotional than women. By creating a critical oppositional gaze, the Love Witch harbours a sense of agency for the feminine, which is in tension with the traditional domination of the masculine. To escape Wayne's emotions, Elaine then cooks breakfast for Wayne and deals her tarot deck. She draws 5 of Cups, the Tower, and the 3 of Swords. 5 of Cups could represent, because a dark figure faces 3 cups tipped over whilst ignoring the 2 standing upright behind, that Elaine is so focused on the failure of past relationships and trying to find the one that she misses other opportunities. The Tower is a major Arcana card which represents a big life event, typically an unforeseen catastrophe. She then draws 3 of Swords again, which essentially is Elaine's calling card. Elaine is shocked, realising that Wayne is no longer alive. She then places a witch bottle containing items like rosemary, a tampon, and urine over a shallow grave in which she has dug. This is probably the closest Elaine has come to sympathising with a male counterpart. By not calling the police and preparing his burial, she hints that she knows just enough wrongdoing in the eyes of modern society. Whilst witch bottles were typically an item of witchcraft constructed for protection, placing the bottle next to Wayne has nothing to do with defending him from negative energies. Rather, she pities him, but only in the sense that his death has disallowed him from ever being able to appreciate and witness her presence ever again. This is likely the reason why she ensures that some remnant of her bodily essence in the form of her tampon and urine are always with him. Elaine laments the loss of her cat during this ritual. A cat, especially for a witch, has classic connotations to the feminine, depicted as a female witch's familiar, an animal for protection. With the loss of this familiar and her rainbow, which could represent her sex, which she burns and gives to the grave, Elaine now has nothing left to give away. If Elaine, as argued by Trish, is brainwashed by the patriarchy and her self-worth wrapped up in pleasing a man, and now that man is dead, who is Elaine? Anna could be trying to show us this violent cycle of self-worth when it is tied to a man. After this scene, Elaine takes a bath. This could be a homemade baptism, so her character can be born again after Wayne's death, thus allowing her to reconfigure her femininity in terms of yielding to male desire. The reality is, Elaine is able to exist without men. We see her simply continue. Even if that attention disappears, Elaine is not reduced to merely a plot device in connection to men. Rather, the focus has always been Elaine. Every character in the film exists in relation to her. It perhaps conflicts with the way that she sees herself. Elaine and Trish have tea and cake again, this time in Elaine's warm-coloured sunroom. Elaine's dressed in another Gunny Sacks dress. Anna explains she always tried to have people wearing yellow in this room because it's the sunroom. There's the feeling of sunshine coming in the windows, but then there's also a feeling of sunshine in the outfits. Whilst sunny, yellow could be interpreted as a warning for danger in this film. Like in the tea room, Elaine and Trish wearing the same colour again, but in very different styles. This may symbolise their uneasy alliance. Trish explains she's going away on a business trip without Richard, which piques Elaine's interest. We are then introduced to 2 blonde Gemini-like twins in the cabaret, referred to as Star and Moon in cult-like inspired linen dresses. Billa wanted to give them a sense of innocent sacrificial lambs. The 2 are newcomers to the witch's circle. In tarot, the star and moon cards are both major arcana, with the star representing hope and guidance, whilst the moon represents uncertainty and illusions. Together, the star may represent the light at the end of the tunnel, and the moon can represent the darkness which must be traversed through to reach this light. We soon learn that Elaine is not only the victim of her husband, but through voiceovers, the victim of her father. Not only do we hear Elaine articulate positive thoughts, but we hear her simultaneously suffer from intrusive thoughts which reveal her traumatic past. This is how feminism, or a feminine perspective, may come through in this film. It doesn't do so from an obvious critique, but rather it's encoded with the female perspective, giving a very sympathetic view of how Elaine sees this world. Elaine first removes her wig. Anna explains, "You can get obsessed with it." Then she takes her hair off. Her hair underneath is much shorter and thinner. That's a kind of construction that you can make your audience aware of. She labours to be this way. It's a construction in itself. Femininity is a construction. It's a performance. Elaine getting dressed in a mirror could be a reference to Jeanne Dielman, who seeks to destroy all forms of the male gaze and the pleasures associated with it. In this voiceover scene, Elaine rubs Witch's flying ointment on her legs. She hears her father's voice as she remembers his verbal abuse. Anna uses a soft light on Elaine's legs, accentuating their beauty in contrast to her father's ugly words. The flying ointment could be wordplay on Elaine's desires to fly away from her past, leaving it behind. The voiceover is a representation of the abuse which has helped shape Elaine into who she has become. It depicts the pain behind her perfectly constructed mask of pleasant femininity, this idea of femininity being a performance, which Elaine tries using to find the love she craves. Her story is one filled with trauma, which runs so deep it blinds her to the trauma she inflicts on others. It's this idea of how the hunted has now become the hunter, and how society has broken her. If taken as a feminist reading, it's the idea that Elaine's character is something which has been socially determined by being a woman who lives in a man's world. It's this idea that she's become this remorseless monster from the disappointment and abuse which has shaped her over and over again. This idea that she's the direct product of the crimes of men. This is confirmed in the next scene, in which we learn that Elaine has been essayed by the head priest during her initiation, whose speech is similar to English occultist Aleister Crowley. During the flashback to the coercive act performed under the guise of a ritualistic induction ceremony, the head priest and patriarch of her coven removes a devil mask and talks about giving her to the sins of the flesh. Being an abuse survivor and not coping with it very well, Elaine's emotional reaction to her repeated trauma is split into two. It brings us back to this idea of an internal struggle and the sun and moon duality of Elaine. On one hand, part of her wants to minimize the importance of her abuse. She does this by trying to validate the needs of her perpetrators, taking control of this fantasy herself. By embracing this submissive role, she takes ownership by taking away her feeling of victimization. But on the other hand, Elaine is angry and wants revenge. She'll give the men what they want, but also take away their control, their will, and their sense of self. There's also a lot of nudity depicted in these scenes. It's been suggested that the female nudity is not a mere source of visual pleasure, as it's both balanced out by the exploration of male nudity and the exploration of Elaine's sexuality. Moreover, the female characters are not positioned as objects of desires or plot devices, but rather central to the plot. As Griff, now promoted, is led to Wayne's body, Elaine calls Richard over for dinner, this time in her moon dining room. Another common colour in The Love Witch, blue, is calming and cool. There are negatives to blue such as coldness, sadness, or aloofness. She serves him a concoction before seducing him. Richard becomes obsessed with Elaine, causing her to abandon their affair. This time we see Richard do a tarot reading. He draws the 9 of Swords, the 3 of Swords, and finally, the Devil. 9 of Swords is a card of utter desolation and obsession. When drawn first, it can be representative of the anxieties, him not being able to see Elaine, which keeps Richard up at night. Three of Swords plays into the idea of tears, separation, and the upheaval caused by being away from Elaine. The Devil is another major Arcana card indicative of a major life event, and ultimately Richard's fate. The loose chains in the card can be representative of his feelings towards Elaine. Rather than letting go of her, he chooses to stay in experiencing these negative thoughts and depression. Soon enough, Griff traces the witch bottle left near Wayne's grave to Elaine. She seduces Griff, announcing he's the man of her cards, her fate, the man she's going to marry. She explains she drew the Knight of Wands, who, like a warrior and filled with energy, resembles Griff. The pair stumble across a Renaissance fair full of Anna's handmade costumes whilst riding one afternoon. The centerpiece of this Renaissance fair is a red cloak stage featuring Arcana imagery once again in the form of the Sun card. The colours of this card are reflected in the fair. There's a lot of yellow, blue, orange and red. Anna explained those are the sun colours again because this is the summer solstice festival. It's all about celebrating the sun. The two then get married in a mock wedding. It's important that the sun's in the background as the card can symbolise a good marriage and happy reunions. It's also arguably Elaine's happiest moment in the film. During the mock wedding dinner, voiceovers play an important role again. We hear Elaine's expectations of what romantic love is set against the reality of what the men she meets like Griff really want. As they happily eat, Elaine's beliefs of the more you know him, the more you love him are set against Griff's voiceover of the more you get to know a woman, the less you can feel about her. The voiceovers continually duel about their opposing ideas of romantic relationship. Whilst Griff isn't in love with Elaine, it's clear he's infatuated when he refuses to believe that Elaine would be capable of murder, much to the ire of his partner Steve. The set of the police station is made up of neutrals like browns and greys, evoking this idea of it being a stereotypically masculine space and allows Elaine's inner and outer world to dominate in comparison. Meanwhile, Trish finds Richard in the bathtub, having taken his own life. Trish invites Elaine to tea again. This time their colour schemes aren't the same at all. Anna explains in the beginning, in this feminine tea room, both women were the same, dressed in peach. The second time we meet Elaine and Trish, they are on opposing sides, so they're not both wearing pink. Trish is wearing black because she's in mourning, whilst Elaine is wearing white because she wants to be a bride. According to Anna, if you had dressed the two characters in the same colour again, you would be implying a similarity or a circularity, or the idea that they hadn't changed. If you want characters to feel opposite, you put one in white and one in black. Trish tries on Elaine's ring from the mock wedding, only to forget to return the ring to her. She decides to leave the ring inside her apartment, but becomes distracted by Elaine's getup. She decides to put it on, imitating Elaine, but eventually discovers Elaine's shrine to her dead lovers. She realises Richard is one of them, but is caught by Elaine. Trish attacks Elaine before leaving the apartment with evidence of Elaine's crimes. At the cabaret, Griff confronts Elaine over the deaths, telling her she's been tied by DNA evidence. Despite his infatuation, he's unwilling to let Elaine go unpunished. This conversation is overheard by the cabaret patrons, who are prejudiced towards witches. But when they attack her, Griff decides to help her escape. Once safe inside her apartment, Elaine concocts a drink for Griff, but he drops it on the floor instead of drinking it. She realizes that no man could ever love her enough, and subsequently decides that the only way she can obtain a man's heart forever is to carve it out of his chest. Throughout the film, her character is shown painting an image of a woman holding a heart, which, pulsing and red, is the ultimate yonic symbol, with a male body lying next to her. Life has thus imitated the prophetic art. Throughout the film, what Elaine wears is a reflection of the environment that she lives in. It was beautiful, lush, and visually pleasing until the devastation hits her that this love doesn't exist for her. Still, in delirium, Elaine smiles, imagining Griff having actually proposed and them at their wedding. Elaine's romantic fantasy doesn't come true, and it's nothing more than an imagined future, which is too impossibly idealistic and perhaps feminine to ever come true. It's perhaps Anna's belief that the real-world female fantasy and pleasure don't have the luxury of being acknowledged as important concepts. Overall, The Love Witch could be a comment on eternal happiness and fulfillment being the deadliest drug sold to a woman. If taken from a feminist perspective, it could be interpreted as Elaine has bought into a version of love so deadly she hasn't realised that what she's been addicted to is a misogynistic lie, which has no regard for her autonomy or desires.